Invited to a luxurious gala at the most prestigious mansion in Beverly Hills, not as a respected guest, but as a cruel joke meant to publicly humiliate you. Now imagine not only accepting that invitation, but arriving in such undeniable style and confidence that the very people who planned your downfall end up stunned and powerless. This is the extraordinary story of Victoria Thames, a woman many saw as just a cleaning lady, but who turned out to be the rightful heir to a fortune and the ultimate symbol of justice and dignity. What began as a malicious prank by a heartless millionaire ended in the most shocking public downfall California high society had ever witnessed. And what makes this story even more fascinating is that its lessons stretch far beyond the walls of a mansion. They touch on prejudice, class, hidden power, and how the underestimated can become unstoppable. Before we dive deeper, think for a moment, how many people do you encounter daily whom you never truly notice? The barista serving your coffee, the janitor sweeping the floor, the receptionist quietly working behind the desk. How often do we judge their worth based on their job titles, without knowing the battles they fought or the secrets they carry? Victoria Thames was one such woman, silent and visible, or so they thought. But what the wealthy guests of Blackwood Mansion failed to realize was that Victoria wasn't merely a servant. She was a storm waiting to break. It all began on an evening designed to degrade. The grand marble hall of the Blackwood estate gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Laughter filled the air. Not the warm kind of laughter, but sharp, mocking chuckles dripping with cruelty. Richard Blackwood, a man intoxicated by power and arrogance, raised his glass of expensive champagne and whispered to his guests with amusement, "Our dear cleaning lady will be joining us tonight." The crowd, a sea of billionaires, socialites, and celebrities, erupted in sneers. They expected her to arrive awkwardly dressed, embarrassed, and unworthy of such a grand affair. But Richard didn't know two things. Victoria had grown up in luxury before life had forced her into cleaning jobs to survive, and more importantly, some people don't break when the storm comes. They learn to dance in the rain. Victoria Thames, a 35-year-old woman of grace and quiet strength, had cleaned every corner of that mansion for 2 years. She heard their fake pleasantries, their rehearsed jokes, their dismissive glances toward staff. She was used to being ignored, treated as furniture rather than a human being. So when Richard handed her that golden invitation with a cruel smile saying, "Dress code, maximum elegance," everyone expected her to decline or appear in some awkward borrowed gown. But Victoria saw the invitation for what it really was, a chance. And so that evening, the jaws of Beverly Hills elite dropped as Victoria descended the marble staircase wearing a gown worth more than most of their annual salaries. The confidence in her step was so sharp that it cut through the thick fog of privilege that filled the room. Guests paused, blinking in disbelief. "My God, she actually came," whispered Patricia Weston, wife of a senator, to her friend. "Where on earth did she get that dress?" Scoffed Vivian Chambers, daughter of an oil tycoon. "Probably rented it on installment." She snorted, masking her own insecurity. But they were wrong. Victoria hadn't rented anything. She retrieved that gown from her, past a past that would soon explode in their faces. And here's something to ponder. Why are people so obsessed with appearances? Why do expensive clothes and fine jewelry make others assume power and worth? It's a phenomenon seen everywhere, from schoolyards to boardrooms. But real power is never in the outfit. It's in the confidence of the person wearing it. Victoria embodied that truth perfectly. She didn't need their approval. She had something far greater, the truth. Richard Blackwood smirked as he approached, surrounded by his laughing entourage. "Victoria, what a surprise," he said smugly. "I didn't think you'd have the nerve." But her calm response sliced through his arrogance. "Why don't you finish that sentence, Richard, a person like me? What exactly do you mean?" For a moment, just a heartbeat, his confidence wavered. The room held its breath, her voice cool and steady. Didn't belong to someone ashamed or out of place. It belonged to someone who knew something no one else did. "No, Richard," she said softly. "I feel exactly where I've always belonged." And here's where the story takes an unbelievable turn, the kind that feels like poetic justice in its purest form. For you see, Victoria Thames wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was Victoria Thames Blackwood, the rightful heiress to the empire. Her mother had once stood in that same ballroom, radiant and loved, until betrayal and greed had driven her and her daughter into obscurity. That dress, it wasn't rented. It was her mother's, a symbol of the legacy Richard tried to erase. Suddenly, the wealthy crowd grew silent. Something monumental was unfolding. This moment reminds us of real-life stories where truth triumphed against deception. Consider the famous case of Anna Delvey, who posed as a German heiress to infiltrate New York's elite. Unlike Victoria, Anna's power was built on lies, but the fallout, the exposure, shook the upper class. Similarly, Victoria's reveal was no deception. It was pure, unfiltered truth, demanding to be seen after years hidden in the shadows. When Victoria pulled out the family ring, an heirloom marked with the Blackwood crest, gasps filled the hall. Richard's smirk vanished, his face drained of color as Victoria declared, "My mother wore this when she stood in this very room 20 years ago, when she was still Victoria Thames Blackwood." Shock rippled like an earthquake. The guests who moments ago laughed at her now stared with horror. Richard's whispered protest fell flat. "This is impossible," he stammered. But Victoria was far from finished. She was here to bring the entire rotting structure of his lies crashing down. And here's an important reflection: how many families have hidden skeletons buried by greed and shame? History books and court cases are full of such betrayals. Secret heirs, disinherited children, hidden affairs covered to protect reputations. The story of Victoria Thames is not just fiction. It echoes the truth of countless forgotten people, whose lives were stolen by powerful hands. But tonight at the Blackwood Mansion, one such forgotten soul had come to reclaim her place. Stay tuned for part 2, where the shocking truth explodes in front of hundreds and the mighty Richard Blackwood watches his empire crumble. You won't want to miss how this incredible tale of dignity, deception, and divine justice unfolds. The hush that fell over the Blackwood Mansion was almost painful. Hundreds of elite guests stood frozen, their gazes flicking between Victoria Thames and Richard Blackwood, searching for meaning in this shocking revelation. What began as a cruel joke was unraveling into a scandal so deep, so rooted in betrayal, that even the most polished smiles could no longer hide the panic beneath. Richard, once the king of this mansion, stammered, "You're lying. You're insane. There's no way you're part of this family." But his words wavered, stripped of the iron confidence he always wielded in these grand rooms. His wife Helena gripped his arm, her face drained of color. "Richard, what is she talking about?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The room, once filled with cruel laughter, now buzzed with whispers of doubt and fear. And this is the strange and wonderful power of truth. When it finally arrives after years buried under deceit, it doesn't knock politely. It kicks down the door, demanding to be seen, felt, and heard. In real-life scandals, like the shocking revelations of Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme, or the betrayal uncovered in corporate giants like Enron, truth didn't arrive gently. It arrived like an avalanche, unstoppable and devastating. And here in this lavish hall, that avalanche had a name: Victoria Thames Blackwood. Victoria's smile remained calm but sharp, like the edge of a blade. "You forgot your history, Richard," she said softly, holding up the Blackwood family ring. "But I didn't. This was my mother's, the woman your father loved before shame and greed made him cast her out. Before you decided that pretending we didn't exist would make us go away." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Patricia Weston gasped, gripping her friend's arm. "Oh my God! Could this be true? Did Richard have a secret sister all these years?" It was no longer gossip and was scandal history in the making. But Richard wasn't done fighting. He laughed nervously, raising his glass like a shield. "Anyone can wear an old ring and spin fairy tales. Where's your proof Victoria rings can be stolen? Stories can be made up. You have nothing." His voice cracked at the edges, revealing the fear boiling beneath the surface. Victoria gave him a smile that could freeze fire. "Richard, do you really think I'd come here without proof after 2 years of silence, of watching, listening, gathering every thread of truth you thought was lost?" She motioned toward the grand doors. "Come in," she called softly. And just like that, the final act of this twisted play began. Through the doors stepped 3 figures who would change everything: Diane Morrison, the most feared investigative journalist in Beverly Hills; David Chun, a ruthless inheritance lawyer known for tearing apart fortune frauds; and lastly, Dr. Hamilton, the Blackwood family's private physician. At the sight of him, Richard's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Now here's where real life creeps eerily into this story. In history, family doctors have held secrets that toppled dynasties, from the Romanovs of Russia to Hollywood's hidden affairs. Doctors carry knowledge they dare not share unless truth demands it. And tonight, Dr. Hamilton was ready to speak. "I was forced to sign a false death certificate 20 years ago. Doctor," Hamilton said, his voice steady, echoing off marble walls. "Henry Blackwood, your father, did not die naturally. He was poisoned. Arsenic, slowly over months. The room erupted, gasping, covering mouths, frantic whispers. Even Helena staggered backward. The rich used to controlling stories and silencing scandal. Watching the skeletons tumble from their gilded closets in full public view, it's reminiscent of the real-life case of the Kennedy family's hidden affairs, or the Johnson Tylenol poisoning cover-up truths meant to stay buried, but somehow always clawing to the surface. David Chun stepped forward. We also have Henry Blackwood's original will. He changed it to include Victoria. Richard knew. He intercepted it. When Henry confronted him about embezzling millions from the family company, he was poisoned before the will could be enacted. Helena gasped, tears filling her eyes. Richard, you murdered your father for money. Her voice cracked horror, painting her face. But Victoria was not done. She lifted her phone connected to the mansion's sound system and played a recording. Richard's voice filled the room. Keep quiet about the poison or you'll lose everything, Hamilton. And as for that woman and her brat, let them rot. They'll never touch a dime of this fortune. There it was, undeniable. The room grew deathly quiet. All the people who had sneered, mocked, and dismissed Victoria now turned pale, avoiding her gaze as if her truth burned too brightly. It's worth pausing here to reflect on how betrayal in the pursuit of wealth is as old as time itself. History remembers countless siblings who turned on each other for power. Cleopatra and her brother, the Borgia family's infamous murders. Even modern royal family rifts like Prince Harry and Prince William. Power breeds secrets. But rarely does the victim return so perfectly prepared to reclaim her rightful place. As Richard collapsed into a chair, his empire crumbling before him, Victoria stepped closer. You didn't just steal my inheritance. You stole 20 years of my life. You made me clean the floors of my own family's house. You made me invisible. Her voice grew softer, more dangerous. But I was never gone. I was watching. And now everything you built on lies is mine. The walls of the grand mansion echoed with the weight of her words. Richard Blackwood, once the master of this empire, was now its prisoner, trapped in a scandal so immense that not even his billions could save him. In that charged silence, time seemed to freeze. Richard Blackwood, once the untouchable king of Beverly Hills high society, sat slumped in his chair like a fallen emperor. Helena stood trembling beside him. No longer the perfectly composed hostess, but a woman betrayed by the man she had once loved. The guests, those shimmering elites in designer gowns and tailored suits, watched in stunned disbelief as the true story of the Blackwood dynasty unfolded before their eyes. Victoria, calm and steady, broke the silence. Richard, you thought you buried me, but you forgot one thing: seeds buried in the dark don't die. They grow. Her words hung in the air like thunderclouds, ready to pour justice over the house of deceit Richard had built. The lawyer David Chun opened a leather folder. Mr. Blackwood had a heartwarming. The will your father signed not only acknowledged Victoria Thames Blackwood as his rightful daughter, but awarded her half of the Blackwood Estate Company shares, and assets totaling nearly $120 million. Gasps filled the room. Some guests instinctively stepped away from Richard, as if afraid that his disgrace might stain their designer shoes. It's a curious thing about power. It draws crowds when it shines, but when it dims, people scatter like frightened birds. History has seen this pattern countless times. Think of Bernie Madoff, once adored by the wealthy elite, later abandoned by the very people who praised him. Or Harvey Weinstein, whose empire crumbled overnight as supporters fled. Now Richard Blackwood was facing the same bitter truth. When your mask falls, you stand alone. Richard sprang from his chair, wild-eyed. This is lies, a setup. You can't take everything from me. But his words rang hollow. Victoria smiled softly, knowingly. I didn't take anything. You gave it all away when you chose greed over family. And then came the final blow. Victoria motioned to the projection screen. Images and documents appeared: bank transfers, secret offshore accounts, bribes to judges, payments to crooked politicians. A voice recording played Richard whispering to his accountant about how to disguise the millions. Siphoned from the company. Make the numbers dance. Blame it on market losses. No one can find out I took 20 million. His voice echoed in the grand hall like a ghost. Helena gasped and covered her mouth. Patricia Weston whispered, My God. He stole from his own company. Some guests shook their heads in disgust. These were the people who had once toasted Richard's genius, who had trusted him with their investments, who now saw the truth: he was no genius. He was a thief. This moment reminds us of real-world stories where the mighty fall hardest. Enron's collapse wiped out thousands of lives. The Theranos scandal left investors impatient, betrayed. But rarely did such truth explode so publicly, so perfectly timed. As the revelations mounted, Richard crumbled. He clutched the back of a gilded chair, sweating eyes darting wildly as if looking for escape. But there was none. Diane Morrison stepped forward, her camera crew capturing every moment. "Mr. Blackwood, you are facing charges of fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, and—" She paused. The word heavy as stone: murder. Murder! The word rang out like a gunshot. The guests gasped, some stepping back as if distance could shield them from the magnitude of the crime. Helena turned to Richard, tears streaming down her face. "You killed your own father." For money, her voice broke, filled with horror and grief. And then the police arrived. Blue lights flashed outside the mansion's tall windows. Officers strode in, firm and unyielding. "Richard Blackwood, you are under arrest for the murder of Henry Blackwood, along with multiple counts of fraud, blackmail, and tax evasion." They read him his rights as they handcuffed him before the shocked crowd. Helena sobbed quietly, turning away from the man she had once married. This scene echoes moments in history when powerful figures fell from grace. From the perp walk of Wall Street criminals to political leaders disgraced before the public eye. Those who believe themselves untouchable often forget that justice, though slow, never stops hunting. Victoria watched quietly, her expression unreadable. A storm of emotions swirled behind her calm gaze. Relief, sorrow, triumph. For 20 years, she had lived in the shadows of her own legacy, scrubbing floors that should have been hers, made invisible by greed. But not anymore. The lead officer turned to her. "Miss Thames Blackwood, thank you for your cooperation. Your testimony and evidence were critical in building this case." Victoria nodded. She had spent 2 years planning every seed of this moment, collecting records, gathering witnesses, piecing together the puzzle of truth, all while dusting the very tables her father once dined at. And here's something truly powerful to consider. How many quiet people in the world today are holding back storms like this? How many janitors, assistants, caregivers, and clerks see the dark secrets of the powerful and bide their time, waiting for justice? Whistleblowers from Edward Snowden to Frances Haugen once sat unnoticed until their voices shook the world. Victoria Thames now joined that quiet legion. As Richard was led away in handcuffs, the guests stared after him in silence. His empire, his reputation, his life gone in a single unforgettable night. And in his place stood the true Blackwood heir, stronger than he ever imagined. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a new chapter for Victoria, for the Blackwood Empire, and for every person who had ever been underestimated. As the heavy mansion doors closed behind the arrested Richard Blackwood, the echoes of his disgrace still hung in the air. The Grand Blackwood Ballroom, once a place of glamour, power, and privilege, now felt like a courtroom where truth had issued its final, undeniable verdict. And standing in the center of it all, calm as the eye of a hurricane, was Victoria Thames Blackwood, the woman they all thought they knew, but never truly saw. A slow, quiet ripple ran through the crowd. Those who had whispered and sneered at Victoria earlier now looked down, unable to meet her gaze. Patricia Weston, pale and shaken, approached hesitantly. "Victoria, we didn't know. We're so sorry." But Victoria raised a hand gently, her voice firm and steady. "No, you knew. You all knew how I was treated. You just thought I wasn't important enough to defend. The only thing that's changed is now you know I'm rich." Her words cut deeper than any accusation. This moment resonates with countless real-life examples where the powerful were forced to confront the humanity of those they ignored. Consider the story of Katherine Johnson, the NASA mathematician, who, despite her brilliance, was made to work in segregated spaces. Only when the world needed her genius did they finally admit her worth. Or the overlooked contributions of countless women and minorities in corporate boardrooms who remain invisible until success or scandal reveals them. Victoria's truth was no different. Helena Richards' devastated wife stood apart from the crowd, trembling. She stepped forward, tears streaking her cheeks. "Victoria, please, I didn't know about any of this, about you." Her voice cracked, the weight of 2 decades of deception crumbling her poise. Victoria met her eyes with rare softness. "I believe you," she said gently. "You were betrayed too. But your children, they deserve a future free of his shadow." Helena sobbed and turned away, her world shattered. At that moment, the journalist Diane Morrison approached Victoria, her camera crew still rolling. "Miss Thames Blackwood," she said softly, "the world is going to want to hear your story. What do you plan to do now that justice is yours?" The room leaned in, hanging on Victoria's every word. And here is where Victoria made her greatest move, not as a victim seeking revenge, but as a leader reshaping an empire. I don't want fame, she replied calmly. I want this company, the Blackwood legacy, to stand for something better than greed and betrayal. Fair wages, respect, opportunity for those who work hard no matter where they start. That is real power. That is real justice. A hush settled again. This wasn't the declaration of vengeance the crowd expected. It was vision, purpose. And the guests, many of whom had spent their lives clinging to status and image, were now faced with the uncomfortable truth. Power could be built on dignity instead of fear. It is rare in real life or fiction to see such a complete reversal. Consider Oprah Winfrey, born into poverty and abuse, rising to become not only the most influential woman in media, but also a builder of schools and opportunities for girls worldwide. Or Howard Schultz, who took Starbucks from a coffee shop to a global movement by offering health benefits to part-time workers, an unheard of idea in corporate America. Like them, Victoria understood power used rightly becomes unstoppable. 6 months later, the Blackwood Empire had transformed. The cold marble walls of Richard's office were gone, replaced by sunlight greenery. Photos of employees promoted from entry-level jobs to executives. The company profits soared not because of schemes, but because workers felt valued, trusted, respected. Productivity rose, innovation bloomed. For the first time in years, the company was alive. Amanda, Victoria's new executive assistant, once a cleaning lady herself, knocked gently on the door. Miss Thames Blackwood, Forbes magazine is here for your interview. Victoria smiled. Let them in. Well, but not for praise or headlines, for the story of how justice can heal. Meanwhile, Richard Blackwood sat in a prison cell, convicted of murder, fraud, blackmail, and tax evasion. He would spend the next 25 years behind bars. His fortune seized, his reputation ashes. Letters from his children trickled into Victoria's mailbox, apologies, pleas for understanding. She kept them all, unanswered reminders of how far greed can fall. And then there was Helena, who had divorced Richard, moved away with her children, and privately thanked Victoria. You could have destroyed us all, but you saved my children from him. I'll never forget that. Victoria's reply was simple. Children should never pay for their parents' sins. Real-life echoes abound. Think of families who suffer for the crimes of their powerful parents. The Madoff family's tragic. Fallout, the tarnished legacies of disgraced politicians. But Victoria broke the cycle. She refused to let guilt poison another generation. The Blackwood Company became a model of fairness. Scholarships for employees' children, free healthcare clinics, domestic violence support funds, microloans for minority entrepreneurs. In 6 months, the empire built on lies became an engine of hope. Profits rose 40%, but more importantly, so did dignity. One quiet afternoon, Victoria received a letter from prison. It was from Richard. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he wrote, but you showed me what I became, a monster. My children want to meet the aunt who saved them from me. Victoria folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness, she knew, was a personal journey, but justice had already been served. During her Forbes interview, the reporter asked the question everyone wanted answered. Some say your revenge was too cruel. What do you say to that? Victoria smiled gently. Revenge would have been to destroy him the way he destroyed me. Justice is different. Justice ensures no one else suffers like I did, and that the truth rises. There's a difference. Weigh into this, dear viewers, is the true lesson of Victoria Thames Blackwood's story. The best revenge is not to destroy those who hurt you. It's to build something so great, so righteous, that their cruelty becomes nothing more than the prologue to your triumph. She didn't break the Blackwood Empire. She redeemed it. As the camera panned over her smiling employees in the company garden, a place where respect, fairness, and kindness bloomed, Victoria knew this was the legacy her father would have wanted. Henry Blackwood's daughter had not only claimed what was rightfully hers, she turned it into something no amount of wealth or deceit could ever destroy. And so the mansion that once plotted her humiliation became the birthplace of her victory. Richard tried to shame a cleaning lady and discovered too late that he had underestimated an heiress, a builder, a force of change. For anyone out there feeling overlooked, belittled, pushed aside, remember this story. Your quiet strength may just be preparing you for a day when the world finally sees who you really are.